I think it's a great question, but also, you know, I've got two sons and two daughters. You know, the challenges I hear in engaging with my son and the life he has at school and the way he interacts and you know what he has to deal with. I think there's some general work with boys about engaging and understanding intimacy and care and bringing much more of that into their lives and not seeing sex as a performance that's really quite a challenge for all boys and not just those boys who've experienced sexual abuse.
Yeah, I don't think too much time. Other people might have questions too, but it's interesting because at that point is that, see, I think one of our challenges really is that pornography is so widely available now that it's actually first experience. See, we could actually construct that as actually an abusive experience in itself, isn't it? We could say that's actually sexual abuse, because that's really giving you, very narrowing your view of sex as performance. So it's interesting that again, you know, the whole thing around young boys, as that young group you're talking about, who are very much in that stage of pubescence and developing a sense of identity and a sense of sexuality, and the hormones are going, the erections are going, their dreams are going, and all that sort of stuff that we know developmentally is happening. So it's kind of interesting to me that idea of, you know, if your first experience is either online pornography or an unwanted sexual contact in terms of abuse experience, that's got to have some profound and long term. Because as we know, by the time we work with men as adults, they have coped with that in all sorts of unhelpful ways generally. So comments about that, Gary, in terms of thoughts?
And I think, yes, the internet porn thing, because, you know, those stats, and I did go searching for them for this talk, because I think it's really important that we understand it in that context. You know, typically first exposure to internet porn around 13, by 16, about 70% of boys would identify, and that's Michael Flood's work out of down in Melbourne. So that's in relation to Australian males. And yes, I mean, and you know, even that's a couple of years old. It is becoming absolutely prolific. The access to pornography. You know, I'm actually 50 now, and you know, if I wanted to access or was exposed to that, would have been by magazines in the 1970s. Whereas nowadays, it's an instant download. And also because the porn is designed in ways that it has the same sort of feel of gaming machines, where they link people in and they move people through a series of sort of pop-ups, kind of anticipation of something ever more exciting, and you know, a kind of final payoff. The guys will follow this and spend hours on this. I've worked with men who spent 10 hours a night on internet porn with their partner lying in the bed next to them, and so it is an absolute problem. I think for those guys who experience sexual abuse, they can become even more hooked in. It has, as I said, all the familiarities of the abusive experience and the abusive dynamic. It clearly objectifies. It also creates interest in diverse sexual practices, which the partners often do not wish to participate in, and so it has a negative impact in that way as well, because it's creating I think, you know, what we need to get our head around is the fact that this is creating sexual desire. The sexual desire doesn't just come automatically, we're born with, but we actually are hooked into these sort of desires. And internet porn creates and accentuates sexual desire, as sexual abuse can do exactly the same thing. And I think that's one of the challenges. We sit with some very simplistic ideas around sexuality, and we need to recognize that these things will impact on us and shape our sexual lives. And internet porn, it can be highly problematic, and nearly all places where I understand that I go and speak with, this is the one thing that people name as highly problematic, whether the person's been sexually abused or not. So absolutely. Next question, just for people. So just wondering what sort of advice you'd have to someone who still feels triggered during sex, even though the sexual abuse occurred many years ago as a child. I'm in my 40s, and this is still a huge problem that I don't seem to be able to heal from. I think that Blake, thank you very, very much for that. I think one of the key things about that experience is taking some time in relation to, and I'll actually start and saying about setting up a positive sexual experience where you feel safe and supported, where there's a real sense of mutual choice and control, and that you have an opportunity to stop, and your partner recognizes or is respectful of that, where healing, because there's an opportunity for healing around this, where the experience of sexual abuse becomes less influential, where you are taking more control and more active in your life in the present. Now, I think one of the difficulties around that is also it requires you sometimes, if you're recognizing these triggers, you want to know what those triggers are. It takes time to identify some of those areas, and we could spend time trying to work through some of those areas, or sometimes people will just avoid certain sexual practices because it's quite challenging in and of itself, and working through it can even be it doesn't produce the outcome for them. In my experience, I think it's really, really important that you get some good support and assistance. Doing this on your own is a real challenge, Blake. I think that it leaves us working with the only information we have is the information that we can garner ourselves, and it means that the only questions we ask sometimes are the questions we can work out for ourselves. And so sometimes some extra support and assistance around this is important, but I would say you find somebody who knows what they're doing, who knows the area of sexual abuse, knows the area of sexuality, and isn't caught up with a whole set of ideas around sexuality as a very positive, supportive, encouraging attitude, but also their knowledge is strong, and you experience them as being supportive and understanding in that work. Sorry, I've got from Cameron here. Men I've worked with often express a wish to not be harmful to others. Is there a place for discussing the harm that porn can have on the people involved in producing it? Absolutely. I think some of those questions I put down about addressing porn. I've just gone back to that slide. That would be another one of those questions around that. It's about sense of and making people aware of the context and the impact on those people who are, because there's plenty of accounts out there now in relation to who are involved in that activity. One of the difficulties with the porn is that and I kind of want to differentiate here between porn and erotica a bit, but I know that some couples do find it very supportive and encouraging. I think that the important thing is that it is something that contributes to a relationship, or that is something that is more of the erotic than the pornographic, where there's equal sex involved here. It's really, really difficult. I can take a strong hard line and say all porn is bad. However, I know for some people that they do find that, and it adds to their relationship. I think for those people involved in the production of that porn, yes, it often does become very harmful and doesn't assist them. And recognizing that people who've experienced sexual abuse, all the evidence in relation to females is they're more likely to be involved in the porn industry. So history of sexual abuse is very high for those women involved in the porn industry. So that's a highly problematic thing. Sorry, Phil, I'm just wondering which counselling models are the most effective in regard to healing from child sexual abuse. Phil, I wish I had some time here. It's a really good one. I think, look, there's some really developed work now in this area that the area of trauma, the complex trauma, is really developing the work of Briere and others who look at this area. One of the things about that is, sorry, for those people who don't know, it talks about phase 1 is about safety and stabilization, phase 2 is about processing and meaning making, phase 3 is about integration into life in this work. Typically they identify working through this, with a six-week set, 6 weeks of each. Now, I think that's very prescriptive. What I think is really important, though, if you're working around sexual abuse, is that somebody also adds in a very strong gender analysis, that they know about sexuality, that they know about sexual abuse, not just trauma, that they spend time talking with the person to hear their particular personal experience. In my work, it's really important to engage with the man, to understand his current life, his life experiences, the strengths, the challenges he has in his life, to make sure all those good things are in place, that he's eating well, sleeping well, he has good connection, supportive relationships, that he's engaged in positive, meaningful activities and work in his life, that he's getting some exercise, that he's physically looking after himself in some way. That then will provide a bit of a platform for me then to talk with him about histories of abuse. However, I need to understand that in the context of the age and time when that happened and what was happening in his life, what the relationship was. Just going to process the actual abusive experience, in my experience, and I'm not seeing a lot of evidence to support this, to say that in and of itself works. In relation to the typical trauma model of post-traumatic stress, that is an area that people go to. However, when it's complex trauma, not just post-traumatic stress disorder, but actually complex trauma, and it's occurred when somebody was a child, then it's much more important to spend time talking with the person and looking at the meaning-making that they have made around this abuse, and also to start to talk about the meaning-making for them in their life and creating a kind of positive life. And I don't think we can get away from the fact of sitting with somebody in the room and talking with them and sitting with them and not knowing what it is that needs to be done, but sitting with them and working with them in working this out in a very collaborative, supportive way, where absolutely, as I've said in this presentation, you prioritize choice and give people absolute choice in the work that they do, and don't tell them they need to do something or they need to go there. It's about them feeling in control of the situations and building up that sense in the life. Hope that answers.